Hello there! This is part 2 of What If Palpatine Found Anakin Before the Jedi Did, so before episode 1. There's a card in the top right now to the first part of this one, but a lot of you guys wanted to see a part 2, and I wanted to make a part 2, so this is part 2. Before we proceed with the story, let me just go over what's already happened, because the first video came out quite a while ago. So the Empire, which is led by Palpatine, is at war with the planets within what has become known as Silent Space, which is controlled by Vader. The Jedi have fled from the known galaxy into the unknown regions because of Palpatine's propaganda against the Jedi. The people within the Empire basically hate the Jedi. And to make sure that this hate remains within the galaxy for the Jedi, Palpatine would say that Vader was a Jedi in order to basically maintain this hate for the Jedi, because obviously the Empire is at war with who they believe to be a Jedi. The people within Silent Space would know Vader's true identity. They would know he was a Sith, and they would see him as a hero because he had helped the planets win a war against the Republic, and now the Empire. Because Silent Space is a result of uprisings, which Palpatine did cause, and Vader ended up actually helping fight against the Empire, or what was then the Republic. And so, he's a hero to Silent Space. This is unlike in the Empire, where people would believe that Palpatine was just a weak old man, someone who had the best interests of the galaxy in mind. And because of the fact that the different sides within the war viewed their leaders very differently, both sides would have very different approaches to trying to win the war. Vader, because he wasn't trying to hide his true identity, would be able to amass a Sith army, a military force where each general was a Sith general, a dark side user trained in the ways of the Sith. So Vader would command legions of highly trained soldiers, with each legion controlled by at least one, and in some cases, many actual Sith. Becoming one of these Sith generals would be seen as one of the highest honours within Vader's military, and from his Sith generals, Vader would pick his Special Forces members, which were dark side users, Sith that were so powerful, the most powerful, and the most skilled Sith he had in his army. On the other hand, because Palpatine would be trying to hide his secret identity from the galaxy, he would have to hunt for a replacement apprentice for Vader in secret. He certainly wouldn't have hundreds of Sith warriors or Inquisitors walking around. So in order to maintain his facade, Palpatine would invest a lot of the Empire's resources into technological advancements for the war efforts. For example, state-of-the-art ships, or maybe planet-destroying weapons, but he wouldn't be investing those resources into training Sith. Meanwhile, in the unknown regions, the Jedi would have their own problems. Some Jedi in the Order would begin to believe that they should have agreed to help fight in the smaller conflicts, as they were supposed to be keepers of the peace, and yet, if they had become actively involved in the conflicts, they could have potentially prevented the current galactic scale conflict, and therefore basically kept the peace. This opinion would begin to spread amongst the Jedi, especially between the younger members of the Order, and after some time a small group of Jedi would leave the Order in an attempt to try and help people affected by the current galactic conflict. This would be a real concern for the Order, as if any of these former Jedi were captured, they may reveal the whereabouts of the Order, whether willingly or as a result of torture. The Order would be forced to move location, and then the High Council would begin to discuss as to how they should proceed. Some Jedi, like Mace Windu, would say that they should take a more active role in helping the galaxy by forming some sort of military force comprised of Jedi, but other Jedi, like Qui Gon, would disagree and argue that they should not add to the conflict. They should only provide aid to those in need, not fight for them as soldiers. As a result of this, division would begin to form within the Order, and whispers of the Jedi splitting into two factions would begin to circulate. Aware of this, Yoda would propose a drastic restructure of the Order. He would say that the Jedi were allowed to disagree, but they were stronger if they still remained united. He would suggest that they form a new council, called the Council of Forceful Galactic Affairs, comprised mostly of Jedi who wanted a Jedi military, and a few Jedi who didn't want a military to make sure that things didn't become too aggressive. They would coordinate all the Jedi who wanted to be part of this Jedi military, and also report back to the High Council. Yoda would suggest this for a number of reasons. First of all, if these different opinions weren't accepted, then another faction of Jedi would form separate from the original Order, which could cause hostility between the different factions of Jedi. Also, in allowing the Jedi who wanted to fight to do so, these Jedi would remain in the Order, so the Order could still support them and prevent them from falling to the dark side. This would also ensure that there were still limits on how aggressive aggressive they would become. So this restructure of the Order would happen. The Jedi would train together and support each other and advise each other, and those that wanted to fight would begin to do so, and those that didn't want to wouldn't. But there would be harmony and acceptance between both viewpoints. By this point in the war, Vader would have had multiple major victories against Palpatine's forces, largely due to Vader's Sith army being far more deadly and better trained than Imperial forces. Also, Palpatine may have access to better technology, but Vader's Special Forces teams would strike decisive blows against key installations within the Empire, rendering them useless and slowing down, if not stopping the production of certain parts for weapons, ships, and vehicles, basically making these technological advancements that the Empire used useless. Another reason that Palpatine would struggle against Vader's forces is that he would struggle to find a new apprentice that he deemed worthy. That is, until a group of Force sensitives appeared on one of the Battlefront worlds and began fighting against both sides of the conflict. Palpatine would personally travel to the planet and discover a group of former Jedi, the ones who left the Order earlier, who were obviously powerful but lacked the self-control expected of a Jedi. They were already embracing the dark side somewhat, and so Palpatine would take the opportunity, capturing the whole group and then pushing them to their limits to see which one would be his new apprentice, and then any others who survived the tests would be used as assassins and mercenaries. These new Force users for the Empire would certainly help to make the war more equal, but not by enough. The Empire may no longer be suffering constant defeats, but resources would be beginning to run low, and just as the divide between the Empire and Silent Space began to stabilise, suddenly large groups of Jedi would begin to appear on war-torn planets and fight on behalf of the civilians suffering as a result of the war against both sides of the conflict. These acts of Jedi military aid would not only destabilise the galactic battlefront, they would also begin to destabilise the Empire as a whole, as civilians would start to see the Jedi that they had once hated in a new light, and so the Jedi would unintentionally inspire small uprisings on certain Imperial worlds who felt mistreated. For example, mining or factory worlds that were important in supplying resources to the Empire, but were often overlooked and mistreated as planets. But Vader wouldn't have this problem. The planets he controlled were far more loyal to him because, again, he was seen as a hero. So the Jedi would accidentally cause a massive shift in the balance of the war, with the Empire being forced into a galactic scale retreat due to basically running out of resources because of uprisings on many planets within the Empire. Palpatine would realise that he had limited time left, so he would form a plan to try and confront and kill Vader. He and his new apprentice would travel to the planet where Vader was, we'll say Kashyyyk. The two of them would confront Vader, and although it was a 2 versus 1, Vader would quickly kill Palpatine's apprentice, and by this point he would have surpassed Sidious in power easily. Vader would kill his former master. Quite quickly, the Empire would crumble and be replaced by a galaxy ruled by Vader. His rule would be known as the Sith Dominion. This wouldn't stop the Jedi from continuing to enter the known galaxy to fight on behalf of the oppressed, and Vader would be unable to prevent the public view of the Jedi from changing to seeing them as heroes. Unfortunately for the Jedi, with the war now basically over, Vader could focus his attention on these Jedi appearances, and therefore could focus his attention on trying to find the Jedi in the unknown regions. Because of this, after suffering a number of losses to Vader's troops and becoming increasingly concerned that one of the Jedi who had been out on one of these missions and not come back had actually been captured rather than killed, the Jedi would agree that they would have to become more nomadic. They would have to move around. They would frequently relocate to other planets or moons still in the unknown regions in order to try and evade the Sith Dominion. After a standard year or so of living like this, and gradually getting further and further into the unknown regions, the Jedi would eventually make contact with a ship from the Chiss Ascendancy. The Chiss, being a group only really concerned about their own safety, would initially order the Jedi to leave, but the Jedi would manage to convince the ship, or the captain of the ship, that they should at least be able to explain their sudden presence in Chiss space to whoever was in a position to make some sort of peace agreement with the Jedi, that is, if they wanted to. The representatives for the Jedi, we'll say Yoda, Mace Windu and Obi-Wan, would be brought in front of a council consisting of high-ranking Chiss. The Chiss would say that they knew of the war and that it had ended. They saw no reason to foster enemies of the Sith Dominion, as that would only lead to more threats to the Chiss Ascendancy. However, the Chiss wouldn't know very much about the Jedi. After all, they lived in the unknown regions, away from the rest of the galaxy, and so they would know that the Jedi were powerful and that was about it. They wouldn't want to make an enemy of the Jedi because they wouldn't know how the Jedi would respond, and so they would offer the Jedi a small section of Chiss space to be allowed to live in. A small sector, just on the edge. If the Jedi went out of this area and into other Chiss territories, they would be treated with hostility, and so the Jedi would now basically be restricted as to where they could exist. They couldn't go too far into Chiss territory, or else they'd be treated as hostile, but they couldn't travel too far into the known galaxy, because that's where the Sith Dominion was. And with the Sith Dominion pushing further and further into the unknown regions every day, it was only a matter of time before this small territory which they were allowed to exist in would become non-existent. The Jedi were also aware of how powerful Vader was, or at least they thought they were. They knew that they might be able to defeat him on his own, with maybe just a few of his Sith generals, but they would know that they were no match for the entire military force that would be brought against them. As the Sith Dominion fleet got closer and closer to Chiss space, the Chiss would contact the Jedi. They would want to discuss where different factions' alliances lay in the potential upcoming conflict. Before the Jedi actually went and talked to the Chiss, but after they'd been asked to go and talk to the Chiss, they would have a quick meeting, and they would decide that they had one piece of information that might give them a chance of survival. They knew that the Sith scouting ships, which investigated unexplored areas of the unknown regions, so the ships that would be the first to discover the whereabouts of the Jedi, were crewed by largely inexperienced crews, and one Sith navigator, gifted in navigation of hyperspace. Vader would do this as he was aware that these ships were likely to be neutralized before reinforcements could arrive in the event of a confrontation, and he wouldn't want to lose any of his important military tacticians. So for this reason, the Sith scouting ships were often captained by overly aggressive captains who wanted to prove their tactical superiority in combat, but this information by itself would not be enough. So the Jedi would go and have a meeting with the Chiss, or at least some of the Jedi, probably the same three as before. The Chiss would say that they didn't want to fight against the Sith Dominion, and they would support the Sith Dominion over the Jedi if they had a choice, because the Sith Dominion was far more powerful, far superior in combat. However, if the Chiss could not avoid war with the Sith Dominion, then they would like the Jedi to be their allies like a backup. So the Jedi was second option. At this, the Jedi wouldn't argue. They would agree with the Chiss that the Sith were clearly the more powerful side in the upcoming conflict, and so if they wanted to keep their people safe, they should side with the Sith Dominion. But equally, they wouldn't want the Chiss to side with the Sith Dominion, and so the Jedi would suggest that the Chiss should test how hostile the Sith would be towards the Chiss in an upcoming conflict before the conflict actually started, which would give the Chiss time to decide which side to take in the upcoming conflict. The Jedi would then suggest that the Chiss should try and make contact with one of the Sith scouting ships, as if they were hostile towards the Chiss, then the Chiss would be able to escape the sector before reinforcements of the Sith arrived. The Jedi would also know that these scouting ships, like we said earlier, were some of the most likely to treat the Chiss as hostile, due to the inexperienced command. So the Jedi would be kind of stacking the odds in their favour as much as they could. They knew that the most likely to attack the Chiss would be these scouting ships, and so if they could make the Chiss make contact with one of these scouting ships, it would give them the best chance of the Chiss siding with the Jedi, rather than the Sith. The Chiss would agree. They wouldn't know that the Sith scouting ships were far more likely to attack them. They would just see them as a weaker ship in the Sith Dominion, and so if they were to attack, they wouldn't do as much damage to a Chiss ship. And so, the Chiss would send a ship into an area where they knew the Sith were investigating. The Chiss would try and explain that they were no enemy of the Sith Dominion, and that they could make a valuable ally. However, like the Jedi expected, or at least hoped, the scouting ship captain would respond and say that if the Chiss were truly willing to be allies, they would embrace the Sith Dominion as the one and only rule in the galaxy. Otherwise, because they were not with the Sith Dominion, they were their enemy. The Chiss would try one more time to explain their value, but the scouting ship would not accept it. At this, the Chiss would flee just as they detected the Sith ship sending a transmission to call for reinforcements, just like the Jedi suggested that they could. The Chiss would then proceed to contact the Jedi. They would say that the Jedi were right, that the Sith were hostile. The Chiss would form an alliance with the Jedi, and this would allow the Jedi to move further into Chiss space, and buy them a little bit more time, and just in time, as the Sith Dominion fleet would reach the edge of Chiss space and engage the Chiss forces. However, the Chiss would quickly be able to force a retreat of the Sith ships, as they were far more familiar with the sectors that they were fighting in, and where the battles were taking place, and would have been able to set up their forces before the Sith arrived. I'm currently editing the video, and it looks like this video is going to be really, really long if I do the whole story in part 2. And so this is the end of part 2. Part 3 will be out very, very soon, so keep an eye out for that. If you're watching this a while after it's come out, it's probably already out. There'll be a card in the top right. Remember to subscribe, comment, like, and all that. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.